Why am I an agnostic? Robert Ingersoll. With thoughts beyond the reaches of our souls. The same rules or laws of probability must govern in religious questions as in others. There is no subject, and can be none, concerning which any human being is under any obligation to believe without evidence. Neither is there any intelligent being who can, by any possibility, be flattered by the exercise of ignorant credulity. The man who, without prejudice, reads and understands the Old and New Testaments will cease to be an orthodox Christian. The intelligent man who investigates the religion of any country without fear and without prejudice will not and cannot be a believer. Most people, after arriving at the conclusion that Jehovah is not God, that the Bible is not an inspired book, and that the Christian religion, like other religions, is the creation of man, usually say, there must be a supreme being, but Jehovah is not his name, and the Bible is not his word. There must be somewhere an overruling providence or power. This position is just as untenable as the other. He who cannot harmonize the cruelties of the Bible with the goodness of Jehovah cannot harmonize the cruelties of nature with the goodness and wisdom of a supposed deity. He will find it impossible to account for pestilence and famine, for earthquake and storm, for slavery, for the triumph of the strong over the weak, for the countless victories of injustice. He will find it impossible to account for martyrs, for the burning of the good, the noble, the loving, by the ignorant, the malicious, and the infamous. How can the deist satisfactorily account for the sufferings of women and children? In what way will he justify religious persecution, the flame and sword of religious hatred? Why did his God sit idly on his throne and allow his enemies to wet their swords in the blood of his friends? Why did he not answer the prayers of the imprisoned, of the helpless? And when he heard the lash upon the naked back of the slave, why did he not also hear the prayer of the slave? And when children were sold from the breasts of mothers, why was he deaf to the mother's cry? It seems to me that the man who knows the limitations of the mind, who gives the proper value to human testimony, is necessarily an agnostic. He gives up the hope of ascertaining first or final causes, of comprehending the supernatural, or of conceiving of an infinite personality. From out the words creator, preserver, and providence, all meaning falls. The mind of man pursues the path of least resistance, and the conclusions arrived at by the individual depend upon the nature and structure of his mind, on his experience, on hereditary drifts and tendencies, and on the countless things that constitute the difference in minds. One man, finding himself in the midst of mysterious phenomena, comes to the conclusion that all is the result of design, that back of all things is an infinite personality, that is to say, an infinite man, and he accounts for all that is by simply saying that the universe was created and set in motion by this infinite personality, and that it is miraculously and supernaturally governed and preserved. This man sees with perfect clearness that matter could not create itself, and therefore he imagines a creator of matter. He is perfectly satisfied that there is design in the world, and that consequently there must have been a designer. It does not occur to him that it is necessary to account for the existence of an infinite personality. He is perfectly certain that there can be no design without a designer, and he is equally certain that there can be a designer who was not designed. The absurdity becomes so great that it takes the place of a demonstration. He takes it for granted that matter was created and that its creator was not. He assumes that a creator existed from eternity without cause and created what is called matter out of nothing, or, whereas there was nothing, this creator made the something that we call substance. Is it possible for the human mind to conceive of an infinite personality? Can it imagine a beginningless being, infinitely powerful and intelligent? If such a being existed, then there must have been an eternity during which nothing did exist except this being. Because if the universe was created, there must have been a time when it was not, and back of that, there must have been an eternity during which nothing but an infinite personality existed. Is it possible to imagine an infinite intelligence dwelling for an eternity in infinite nothing? How could such a being be intelligent? What was there to be intelligent about? There was but one thing to know, namely, that there was nothing except this being. How could such a being be powerful? There was nothing to exercise force upon. There was nothing in the universe to suggest an idea. Relations could not exist, except the relation between infinite intelligence and infinite nothing. The next great difficulty is the act of creation. My mind is so that I cannot conceive of something being created out of nothing. Neither can I conceive of anything being created without a cause. Let me go one step further. It is just as difficult to imagine something being created with as without a cause. To postulate a cause does not in the least lessen the difficulty. In spite of all, this lever remains without a fulcrum. We cannot conceive of the destruction of substance. The stone can be crushed to powder, and the powder can be ground to such a fineness that the atoms can only be distinguished by the most powerful microscope, and we can then imagine these atoms being divided and subdivided again and again and again. But it is impossible for us to conceive of the annihilation of the least possible imaginable fragment of the least atom of which we can think. Consequently, the mind can imagine neither creation nor destruction. From this point, it is very easy to reach the generalization that the indestructible could not have been created. These questions, however, will be answered by each individual according to the structure of his mind, according to his experience, according to his habits of thought, and according to his intelligence or his ignorance, his prejudice or his genius. Probably a very large majority of mankind believe in the existence of supernatural beings, and a majority of what are known as the civilized nations in an infinite personality. In the realm of thought, majorities do not determine. Each brain is a kingdom, each mind is a sovereign. The universality of a belief does not even tend to prove its truth. A large majority of mankind have believed in what is known as God, and an equally large majority have as implicitly believed in what is known as the devil. These beings have been inferred from phenomena. They were produced for the most part by ignorance, by fear, and by selfishness. Man in all ages has endeavored to account for the mysteries of life and death, of substance, of force, for the ebb and flow of things, for earth and star. The savage, dwelling in his cave, subsisting on roots and reptiles, or on beasts that could be slain with club and stone, surrounded by countless objects of terror, standing by rivers, so far as he knew, without source or end, by seas with but one shore, the prey of beasts mightier than himself, of diseases strange and fierce, trembling at the voice of thunder, blinded by the lightning, feeling the earth shake beneath him, seeing the sky lurid with the volcano's glare, fell prostrate and begged for the protection of the unknown. In the long night of savagery, in the midst of pestilence and famine, through the long and dreary winters, crouched in dens of darkness, the seeds of superstition were sown in the brain of man. The savage believed, and thoroughly believed, that everything happened in reference to him, that he, by his actions, could excite the anger or by his worship placate the wrath of the unseen. He resorted to flattery and prayer. To the best of his ability he put in stone, or rudely carved in wood, his idea of this god. For this idol he built a hut, a hovel, and at last a cathedral. Before these images he bowed, and at these shrines whereon he lavished his wealth, he sought protection for himself and for the ones he loved. The few took advantage of the ignorant many. They pretended to have received messages from the unknown. They stood between the helpless multitude and the gods. They were the carriers of flags of truce. At the court of heaven, they presented the cause of man, and upon the labor of the deceived they lived. The Christian of today wonders at the savage who bowed before his idol, and yet it must be confessed that the God of stone answered prayer and protected his worshippers precisely as the Christian's God answers prayer and protects his worshippers today. My mind is so that it is forced to the conclusion that substance is eternal, that the universe was without beginning and will be without end, that it is the one eternal existence, that relations are transient and evanescent, that organisms are produced and vanish, that forms change, but that the substance of things is from eternity to eternity. It may be that planets are born and die, that constellations will fade from the infinite spaces, that countless suns will be quenched, but the substance will remain. The questions of origin and destiny seem to be beyond the powers of the human mind. Heredity is on the side of superstition. All our ignorance pleads for the old. In most men, there is a feeling that their ancestors were exceedingly good and brave and wise, and that in all things pertaining to religion their conclusions should be followed. They believe that their fathers and mothers were of the best, and that that which satisfied them should satisfy their children. With a feeling of reverence, they say that the religion of their mother is good enough and pure enough and reasonable enough for them. In this way, the love of parents and the reverence for ancestors have unconsciously bribed the reason and put out, or rendered exceedingly dim, the eyes of the mind. There is a kind of longing in the heart of the old to live and die where their parents lived and died, a tendency to go back to the homes of their youth. Around the old oak of manhood grow and cling these vines. Yet it will hardly do to say that the religion of my mother is good enough for me, any more than to say the geology or the astronomy or the philosophy of my mother is good enough for me. Every human being is entitled to the best he can obtain. And if there has been the slightest improvement on the religion of the mother, the son is entitled to that improvement, and he should not deprive himself of that advantage by the mistaken idea that he owes it to his mother to perpetuate, in a reverential way, her ignorant mistakes. If we are to follow the religion of our fathers and mothers should have followed the religion of theirs. Had this been done, there could have been no improvement in the world of thought. The first religion would have been the last, and the child would have died as ignorant as the mother. Progress would have been impossible, and on the graves of ancestors would have been sacrificed the intelligence of mankind. We know, too, that there has been the religion of the tribe, of the community, and of the nation, and that there has been a feeling that it was the duty of every member of the tribe or community and of every citizen of the nation to insist upon it that the religion of that tribe, of that community, of that nation, was better than that of any other. We know that all the prejudices against other religions and all the egotism of nation and tribe were in favor of the local superstition. Each citizen was patriotic enough to denounce the religions of other nations and to stand firmly by his own. And there is this peculiarity about man. He can see the absurdities of other religions while blinded to those of his own. The Christian can see clearly enough that Mohammed was an impostor. He is sure of it because the people of Mecca who were acquainted with him declared that he was no prophet, and this declaration is received by Christians as a demonstration that Mohammed was not inspired. Yet these same Christians admit that the people of Jerusalem who were acquainted with Christ rejected him, and this rejection they take as proof positive that Christ was the Son of God. The average man adopts the religion of his country, or rather, the religion of his country adopts him. He is dominated by the egotism of race, the arrogance of nation, and the prejudice called patriotism. He does not reason, he feels. He does not investigate, he believes. To him the religions of other nations are absurd and infamous, and their gods monsters of ignorance and cruelty. In every country, this average man is taught first that there is a supreme being. Second, that he has made known his will. Third, that he will reward the true believer. Fourth, that he will punish the unbeliever, the scoffer, and the blasphemer. Fifth, that certain ceremonies are pleasing to this God. Sixth, that he has established a church. And seventh, that priests are his representatives on earth. And the average man has no difficulty in determining that the God of his nation is the true God, that the will of this true God is contained in the sacred scriptures of his nation, that he is one of the true believers, and that the people of other nations, that is, believing other religions, are scoffers, that the only true church is the one to which he belongs, and that the priests of his country are the only ones who have had or ever will have the slightest influence with this true God. All these absurdities to the average man seem self-evident propositions, and so he holds all other creeds in scorn and congratulates himself that he is a favorite of the one true God. If the average Christian had been born in Turkey, he would have been a Mohammedan, and if the average Mohammedan had been born in New England and educated at Andover, he would have regarded the damnation of the heathen as the tidings of great joy. Nations have eccentricities, peculiarities, and hallucinations, and these find expression in their laws, customs, ceremonies, morals, and religions. And these are in great part determined by soil, climate, and the countless circumstances that mold and dominate the lives and habits of insects, individuals, and nations. The average man believes implicitly in the religion of his country because he knows nothing of any other and has no desire to know. It fits him because he has been deformed to fit it, and he regards this fact of fit as an evidence of its inspired truth. Has a man the right to examine, to investigate the religion of his own country, the religion of his father and mother? Christians admit that the citizens of all countries not Christian have not only this right, but that it is their solemn duty. Thousands of missionaries are sent to heathen countries to persuade the believers in other religions not only to examine their superstitions, but to renounce them and to adopt those of the missionaries. It is the duty of a heathen to disregard the religion of his country and to hold in contempt the creed of his father and of his mother. If the citizens of heathen nations have the right to examine the foundations of their religion, it would seem that the citizens of Christian nations have the same right. Christians, however, go further than this. They say to the heathen, "You must examine your religion, and not only so, but you must reject it. And unless you do reject it, and, in addition to such rejection, adopt ours, you will be eternally damned." Then these same Christians say to the inhabitants of a Christian country, "You must not examine, you must not investigate. But whether you examine or not, you must believe, or you will be eternally damned." If there be one true religion, how is it possible to ascertain which of all the religions the true one is? There is but one way. We must impartially examine the claims of all. The right to examine involves the necessity to accept or reject. Understand me, not the right to accept or reject, but the necessity. From this conclusion, there is no possible escape. If, then, we have the right to examine, we have the right to tell the conclusion reached. Christians have examined other religions somewhat, and they have expressed their opinion with the utmost freedom. That is to say, they have denounced them all as false and fraudulent, have called their gods idols and myths, and their priests impostors. The Christian does not deem it worthwhile to read the Quran. Probably not one Christian in 1,000 ever saw a copy of that book, And yet all Christians are perfectly satisfied that the Quran is the work of an impostor. No Presbyterian thinks it is worth his while to examine the religious systems of India. He knows that the Brahmins are mistaken and that all their miracles are falsehoods. No Methodist cares to read the life of Buddha, and no Baptist will waste his time studying the ethics of Confucius. Christians of every sort and kind take it for granted that there is only one true religion, and that all except Christianity are absolutely without foundation. The Christian world believes that all the prayers of India are unanswered, that all the sacrifices upon the countless altars of Egypt, of Greece, and of Rome were without effect. They believe that all these mighty nations worshipped their gods in vain, that their priests were deceivers or deceived, that their ceremonies were wicked or meaningless, that their temples were built by ignorance and fraud, and that no god heard their songs of praise, their cries of despair, their words of thankfulness, that on account of their religion no pestilence was stayed, that the earthquake and volcano, the flood and storm went on their ways of death, while the real God looked on and laughed at their calamities and mocked at their fears. We find now that the prosperity of nations has depended not upon their religion, not upon the goodness or providence of some god, but on soil and climate and commerce, upon the ingenuity, industry, and courage of the people, upon the development of the mind, on the spread of education, on the liberty of thought and action, and that in this mighty panorama of national life, reason has built and superstition has destroyed. Being satisfied that all believe precisely as they must, and that religions have been naturally produced, I have neither praise nor blame for any man. Good men have had bad creeds, and bad men have had good ones. Some of the noblest of the human race have fought and died for the wrong. The brain of man has been the trysting place of contradictions. Passion often masters reason, and the state of man, like to a little kingdom, suffers then the nature of an insurrection. In the discussion of theological or religious questions, we have almost passed the personal phase, and we are now weighing arguments instead of exchanging epithets and curses. They who really seek for truth must be the best of friends. Each knows that his desire can never take the place of fact, and that next to finding truth, the greatest honor must be won in honest search. We see that many ships are driven in many ways by the same wind. So men, reading the same book, write many creeds and lay out many roads to heaven. To the best of my ability, I have examined the religions of many countries and the creeds of many sects. They are much alike, and the testimony by which they are substantiated is of such a character that to those who believe is promised an eternal reward. In all the sacred books there are some truths, some rays of light, some words of love and hope. The face of savagery is sometimes softened by a smile, the human triumphs, and the heart breaks into song. But in these books are also found the words of fear and hate, and from their pages crawl serpents that coil and hiss in all the paths of men. For my part, I prefer the books that inspiration has not claimed. Such is the nature of my brain that Shakespeare gives me greater joy than all the prophets of the ancient world. There are thoughts that satisfy the hunger of the mind. I am convinced that Humboldt knew more of geology than the author of Genesis, that Darwin was a greater naturalist than he who told the story of the flood, that Laplace was better acquainted with the habits of the sun and moon than Joshua could have been, and that Haeckel, Huxley, and Tyndall know more about the earth and stars, about the history of man, the philosophy of life, more that is of use 10,000 times than all the writers of the sacred books. I believe in the religion of reason, the gospel of this world, in the development of the mind, in the accumulation of intellectual wealth, to the end that man may free himself from superstitious fear, to the end that he may take advantage of the forces of nature to feed and clothe the world. Let us be honest with ourselves in the presence of countless mysteries, standing beneath the boundless heaven, sown thick with constellations, knowing that each grain of sand, each leaf, each blade of grass asks of every mind the answerless question, knowing that the simplest thing defies solution, feeling that we deal with the superficial and the relative, and that we are forever eluded by the real, the absolute. Let us admit the limitations of our minds, and let us have the courage and the candor to say, we do not know. What I want for Christmas, a freethinker's wishes, Robert Ingersoll. If I had the power to produce exactly what I want for next Christmas, I would have all the kings and emperors resign and allow the people to govern themselves. I would have all the nobility drop their titles and give their lands back to the people. I would have the Pope throw away his tiara, take off his sacred vestments, and admit that he is not acting for God, is not infallible, but is just an ordinary Italian. I would have all the cardinals, archbishops, bishops, priests, and clergymen admit that they know nothing about theology, nothing about hell or heaven, nothing about the destiny of the human race, nothing about devils or ghosts, gods or angels. I would have them tell all their flocks to think for themselves, to be manly men and womanly women, and to do all in their power to increase the sum of human happiness. I would have all the professors in colleges, all the teachers in schools of every kind, including those in Sunday schools, agree that they would teach only what they know, that they would not palm off guesses as demonstrated truths. I would like to see all the politicians change to statesmen, to men who long to make their country great and free, to men who care more for public good than private gain, men who long to be of use. I would like to see all the editors of papers and magazines agree to print the truth and nothing but the truth, to avoid all slander and misrepresentation, and to let the private affairs of the people alone. I would like to see drunkenness and prohibition both abolished. I would like to see corporal punishment done away with in every home, in every school, in every asylum, reformatory, and prison. Cruelty hardens and degrades, kindness reforms and ennobles. I would like to see the millionaires unite and form a trust for the public good. I would like to see a fair division of profits between capital and labor, so that the toiler could save enough to mingle a little June with the December of his life. I would like to see an international court established in which to settle disputes between nations, so that armies could be disbanded and the great navies allowed to rust and rot in perfect peace. I would like to see the whole world free, free from injustice, free from superstition. This will do for next Christmas. The following Christmas, I may want more. The Arena, Boston, December 1897.